Welcome to the world where creativity meets technology. Ever wondered how to blend the power of Java with the vast possibilities of YouTube? That's exactly what we're diving into today. Let's embark on a journey to seamlessly integrate Java applications with YouTube's rich media platform. Hi, I'm Nemanja and I'm here to guide you through integrating YouTube's API with Java. In this video, we will go through different sections like what is YouTube API, what are the benefits and limitations, and finally, how can YouTube API be integrated with Java. Before we dive into the benefits and limitations, let's understand what the API is. API stands for Application Programming Interface. Think of it as a bridge that lets your Java application talk to YouTube. It's a set of rules and tools that allow your app to interact with YouTube's platform. Using the API, your Java application can do things like uploading videos, managing playlists, and accessing video analytics directly from YouTube. It's like having a remote control for YouTube's features directly within your Java app. This API opens up a world of possibilities for developers and content creators alike. Let's look at the benefits of using YouTube's API for your Java apps. First is control over your content. The API gives you the power to upload, update, and organize videos easily. Second, user engagement. By featuring channels' content in your app, you can keep audience more engaged. Next is data insights. You get valuable information about how videos are performing, helping creators make better content. And finally, customization. You can tailor how channels' content is displayed in your app, creating a unique experience for users. Now that we know what the benefits are, let's talk about YouTube API limitations. First is usage limits. There are specific rules on how much you can use the API, so you need to be mindful of not overdoing it. Second, adapting to changes. YouTube can change its API and your app might need updates to keep up. And third, we have a learning curve. If you're new, integrating the API with Java can be challenging, but on the other hand also rewarding. Then we have a secure authentication. Safe sign-in is necessary for using the API, which adds a layer of complexity. And importantly, compliance with YouTube's policies. Your app must strictly follow YouTube's terms of service, especially around content management and user data, to ensure you're using the API responsibly. This would be pretty much all you need to know before starting to code, so let's switch gears now and dive into some actual work. I'm going to walk you through setting up your environment and then guide you step by step through coding some key functionalities of our YouTube integration. Okay, so let's start. First thing we want to do is search for Google Developer Console. Once we click on this link, you can see that I don't have any projects created, so I'm gonna use this button here to create a new project. I'm gonna name it YouTube Tutorial API. For location, you don't need to specify any organization, so I'm gonna leave that as is. Once we click on create, you can see that here in notification, it will let us know once the project is created. We can click on this now, and this will open our project. You can see here a dashboard with all different kinds of widgets, but for this demo, I'm gonna navigate to menu and then APIs and services, and then click on library. Inside, we are going to search for YouTube data. And as a suggestion, we get this YouTube Data API v3, and we have one result, and then enable. Once it's enabled, you can see on the right side, I have this create credentials button. So I'm gonna click on that. There are two main types of data access, user and public data. If our application needs to access data belonging to a Google user, like their playlists or viewing history, we select user data. This requires user consent and leads to the creation of an OAuth client. On the other hand, if we only need to access publicly available data, like searching for public videos or retrieving public channel information, we choose public data. This will create a standard API key without the need for user consent. For our tutorial, we are focusing on user data, so I'm going to select that and then hit next. Now we need to fill some basic information about our app, like the app name. You can put any name you want. I'm going to put YouTube tutorial. For support email, I'm going to use the default one. App logo is optional, but keep in mind that if you submit your logo here, it may start verification flow with Google. So for now, we don't want this since we are still in the development phase. And finally, developer contact information. I'm going to put my email here as well. Third step is configuring our application by selecting the appropriate scopes. These are essentially permissions that we request from the users. They determine what type of data your application can access from the user's Google account. As you can see here, there are 3 types of scopes: non-sensitive, sensitive, and restricted. Non-sensitive scopes provide basic access and usually don't involve highly personal information. Sensitive, on the other hand, are private user data, and restricted scopes are for the most private data, often requiring thorough review from Google. For our integration, we'll need to select scopes that correspond to the type of data we need to access. For example, if we want to read users' YouTube playlist, we would select a scope like YouTube.readOnly. For this tutorial, we are gonna need channel description, name. That's why I'm gonna put YouTube read only. But remember that you can edit these settings anytime you want. But if your app is verified by Google and you change these scopes, it might need to go through the verification flow again. I'm gonna save and continue. And then for the application type, we are gonna select web application. Name, we can leave it as is. And for authorized JavaScript origins, we need to add our local endpoints. So in my case, it's HTTP localhost, and my Java app runs on port 8080. So I'm gonna put that as well. And for authorized redirect URIs, I'm gonna add the same endpoint as above, but I'm gonna add /callback as well, because we are gonna have separate endpoint that's gonna handle this functionality here. And finally, I'm gonna click on create. As you can see here, my credentials are created, and I can use this download button to save the JSON file on my computer. Now, the final step in Google Developer Console is to go to this OAuth consent screen, and under the test users, we need to specify our Google account that we are going to use for test purposes. So I'm gonna click here, add users, and then you should type your Google account that has at least one YouTube channel connected. Once it's added, we can now close the Google Developer Console and now move on with a Spring Initializer. Spring Initializer is a really powerful tool that can easily create Java projects for you with the Spring Boot already added. So here I'm gonna select Maven as our build tool. Then for language, we're gonna keep with Java. For Spring Boot version, I'm gonna keep what's already selected. Inside group, I'm gonna change this instead of example to use more descriptive name like YouTube, and then artifact can be API. And in the description, we can put something like down project for YouTube API integration. And Java version, I want to stick to 21, so I'm going to select that. Finally, I'm going to add one dependency from here, and that's Spring Web. Other dependencies that we're going to need, like YouTube API libraries, Google libraries, we're going to add that separately. So I'm gonna finish up with clicking on this generate button, and this will save this initial project on my machine. Now let's open this directory where project and client secrets are saved. First thing I want to do is rename the client secret JSON file. I'm gonna name it client secrets, and then extension is JSON. And I'm gonna unpack API zip file. I'm gonna delete this. And I'm gonna copy client secrets inside API, source, main, and resources. You will see when we start coding how we can get the information that's inside this client secrets JSON. I'm using IntelliJ as my preferred IDE, but you can of course use Eclipse, Visual Studio, or whatever software that works for you. I'm gonna click on open, and then inside my tutorials there is an API project that we downloaded from Spring Initializer. I'm gonna open that. As you can see here on the left side we have our project. Inside we have a source folder with main and test. Inside main we have resources where we saved our client secrets JSON. Also we have this application properties that's part of our Spring Boot framework. And first thing I like to do is rename these application properties to application YAML, because it's easier for me to edit YAML files. And I'm gonna also open this file and add server and then port, because if you remember, when we were setting up project on Google Developer Console, we specified 8080 as a port, so I'm gonna mirror that here. One more thing I want to do is check for SDK version. You can do that by clicking on a file and then project structure. Inside you can see that I'm using SDK version 21, which also aligns with Java version I've selected in Spring Initializer. That being said, I can now add some packages in my root directory. So the first one is going to be UI package for storing front-end related classes. Next, I'm going to create service package, then auth for authorization. And finally, we need a package where we are going to store our controllers. Let's move on and add the necessary dependencies to our POM XML. These include the Google API and YouTube Data API client libraries and additional dependencies for OAuth 2.0. Now, the important step that you need to take when adding dependencies in your POM XML is to either right-click on POM XML and then go on Maven and reload project, or you can also go on this search everywhere button and search for Maven, and this will give you an option to reload all Maven projects. So I'm gonna click on that, and now all these libraries are installed inside my project. So I can close this now. First, in the auth directory, we'll create an auth.java file. So let's start with a public static string get authorization URL. Now, in order for Google to even let us start this flow, we are going to use this client secrets JSON that we created before and read the data from that file. So I'm going to use an input stream. In get resource as stream, I'm gonna pass path to my client secrets. That's why we placed it under the resources, so we can just say slash and then file name. Next step is to create a Google Client Secrets variable in which we are going to load our file. Load method actually accepts two properties. First is JSON factory, and the second one should be this input stream reader that we created. So for JSON factory, I'm going to declare it as private static and then final. And this will just take the default instance of Jackson factory. Now that we have this declared, we can just say JSON factory, and second parameter will be new input stream reader from our previously declared variable in. Now you will see that the load method is actually reporting some problems. That's because we don't handle the exceptions. So we can either add exception to method signature like this, or what I prefer to do is go here on more action and then surround with try and catch. And inside catch, we can actually print the message that some error occurred, so we are more informed about what really happened. Now that we have Google Client Secrets, we can build so-called Google authorization code flow. Inside we will place builder actually needs HTTP transport, so we are gonna declare it right here. As a second parameter, we're gonna pass JSON factory, then a Google Client Secrets, and finally we are gonna need scopes. We don't have that declared, but we can also create private static final collection, which is essentially gonna be a list of scopes that we defined when setting up project in Google Developer Console. So if you remember, we had only one scope called YouTube read only, and I'm gonna place that right here. And now we can finish up our call here with the set access type to offline, and finally build. Based on the Google authorization code flow, we can now simply do a return of new authorization URL. We also need to define a redirect URI, which is located in our client secrets. Since it's a list, I'm gonna take the first one and finally call a build method. Now that we have our method completed, we need to test it somehow. So in order to do that, I'm gonna create a new controller. I'll name it OAuth controller. Spring has this cool annotation where you can put on top of your class @REST controller, and it will automatically categorize your class as a controller. So now we can use annotation get mapping, and then we are going to pass endpoint that's going to be called when user clicks on authorize button. We want this method to simply return URL generated by Google, so the return type is going to be string. And inside we are going to simply return auth.getAuthorizationURL. Now that we have an endpoint on our backend that some frontend can call, we also need to declare one simple class in our UI package. I'll call it OAuth test UI. Inside we are gonna create a simple graphic user interface by declaring main method. Let's first declare a JFrame for our UI called frame, and then a title that's gonna be displayed. This will essentially create a new window. Now we also need a J button, something that user can click on. And we also need to put some text inside. In order for this button to have some functionality, we are going to call add action listener. An action listener is an interface that receives action events, like when someone clicks on a button. In our case, we want to execute authorize endpoint that we created. So we are gonna call desktop and then get desktop browse, and browse, as you can see, accepts one parameter, and that's URI, and we are gonna simply pass our authorize endpoint. When the button is clicked, this line of code opens the user's default web browser and navigates to HTTP localhost 8080 authorize. Now, some final things that we want to do is set a default close operation. This ensures that the application will close when the window is closed. We also want to define a size 350 by 200, which is width and height. For layout, we are simply gonna put new flow layout. This defines the layout manager for the frame. Important part is that we also need to add this button that we created before. And finally, our frame needs to have visibility set to true. Now that we have our demo UI application ready to call our backend, I can simply start by clicking on this run button here. As you can see in the console, I have this message started application in 0.673 seconds, which means our backend application is now running. And finally, I want to start our demo UI application as well by clicking on this button here. And this opens up a Swing application with one button that says Authenticate with Google. When I click on this button, you'll see that I'm getting a URL generated by the Google. So this confirms that everything is working fine so far. Now let's go back to our application and perform some changes in our OAuth controller. Inside our authorize method, instead of just returning the authorization URL, we want user to be automatically redirected when this endpoint is called. So I'm gonna change the return type from string to redirect view. This URL that's being generated by Google, I'm gonna store that in string variable. And lastly, I'll create a redirect view object with view URL variable that we declared before. Now, if we stop our applications and rerun it again, now hopefully when I click on this button, I won't see this link anymore, but instead I should be prompted with a list of my Google accounts that I can use to authenticate. And as you can see, we are getting the right response. For this demo purposes, I'm gonna use the first one. That's because I've added this account when we were in Google Developer Console. When I click on it, you can see that I have a list of all of my YouTube channels. As an example, let's take this one. Next screen that we see is that Google hasn't verified this app yet. This is okay because we didn't apply it for verification yet. So I'm just gonna click on continue. So now Google is displaying what kind of permissions I need to grant to this app. I'm just gonna click on allow. And this white label error issue that we see here is okay because we actually didn't specify the callback endpoint in our app. So if we go back to the API application, so let's quickly fix that and create one additional get mapping with a /callback endpoint. This is also going to be a public method. And as a return type, I want to put string and then a method name. This method accepts one request parameter, so we are going to define that here. And the parameter name is code. And as a simple test, let's just return a string saying that callback endpoint has been executed. Now, if we stop all applications and then rerun it, now when we go through the flow, we should see this message displayed on our screen. And it works. Great. And finally, we want to be a bit more descriptive and say something like welcome to the platform and then a channel name. And in order to do that, I actually need to add new methods in our auth class. So this code parameter that we define here, we want to exchange it and return token response. This method is actually really similar to get authorization URL, so I'm gonna copy and paste that. The only difference is that instead of returning a new authorization URL, we want to do return and then codeflow.new token request. We're going to pass code and we are going to set a redirect URI the similar way as before. Now we want to have a clean code, so this duplication that we have in these two methods is really something that we should handle. That's why I'm going to create two separate private methods. The first one is going to be get secrets, and it's just going to return Google Client Secrets object. So I can use now this newly created method and place it here. I don't need this catch block anymore. But I do need to handle this exception for execute. I'm just gonna use this throws EO exception. And similar we can do for the method below. Now this looks better, but let's go even further and extract this part as well. For this we are going to create another private static method called build Google Flow. The return type is going to be Google authorization code flow. And it's going to accept Google Client Secrets. And here we are just going to simply do a return. Now I can use this method and replace this code here. And again for this method here as well. Now, as you can see, these two methods are now much cleaner. So let's save this and call the exchange code in our callback. Next step is to create one more method in the auth class, and that's the get credentials from token response. This will return a credential object from Google. So I'm gonna put it in a public method again. For this to work, I also need Google Client secrets and Google authorization code flow. And finally, we want to return results from calling a create and store credential method. Now in our controller, let's head back and define the credentials. And here comes the final part of our callback method, and that's fetching the channel name. For this, I'm going to create a new class in our service package. In YouTube service, we are going to simply copy and paste JSON factory and HTTP transport. And then we are going to have this one method called get YouTube channel name. Inside, we are going to call a YouTube service, but this service is located under this library that we included in our POM XML. Application name is a required parameter, so we are just going to put our project name. Now with this YouTube service defined, we also need to set what channels we want to fetch. To do that, we can type YouTube and then channels list. Give it a name, channels list. And then we simply want to pass snippet because that's what we are interested in, since the snippet contains the channel name. Also, one additional parameter that we want to pass is mine, and we are going to set it to true. This tells Google that we want to fetch channels that are only related to the user that's authenticated. And the final thing is actually to call this YouTube service method and fetch the data. To do that, we are first going to define a variable where we are going to store these results. And lastly, we just call the execute method. Sometimes if user clicks on a Google account that doesn't have any YouTube channel connected, we can get an empty list. So in order to prevent any errors, I'm just gonna put an if condition and then check if the authenticated user has more than one YouTube channel. If that's the case, I'm just gonna do return and then channel list response, get items, just gonna fetch the first one. And then in our snippet, there is a get title. As you can see here in the list, I can fetch different data like country, description, default language, when the channel was published, thumbnails, and so on. So if you want to play around, you can always change this and see the results on your end. For this demo, I'm going to stick with get title. And in else block, I'm just going to return unknown channel. Now let's call our method in callback. We're gonna store channel name in a string. And finally, we are gonna alter this message saying, hi, welcome to the party, and then a channel name. Now I'll stop once more our two applications and rerun it again. As you can see, the channel name is printed correctly. So this is how you can easily fetch the channel informations. For this demo, I'm gonna do just one more experiment and change the channel description so we can see if that's gonna reflect in our app immediately. I'm gonna open YouTube Studio. And in customization, I have basic info. Description, we can put something like, hey, and welcome to my channel. Let's publish this. Now, if we go back to our application and go to YouTube service, as we shown before, we can change this to get description. I'm also going to rename this method to be more descriptive. And finally, in my controller, I'm going to put description and say, this is my channel description. Now let's rerun. And there it is. The description that we just put is automatically displayed in our app. This will be all for this video. I really hope that you enjoyed learning how YouTube API can be integrated with application written in Java. If you have any suggestions or maybe want to see extended version for this video, please leave a comment down below. Also, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share. I'll see you in the next one.